Bahira Sherif Trask is a professor and chair of the Department of Human Development and Family Sciences at the University of Delaware. She received her BA in political science with an emphasis in international relations from Yale and her PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania. Her research is focused on cultural anthropology, particularly having to do with global or gender studies on a global level, not only the US and Western countries, but globally. She has done research in the US and Europe, but also in Middle Eastern countries such as Egypt and Turkey. She has written several books, perhaps most notably her book, Globalization and Families, Accelerated Systemic Social Change. It was after she'd written that book that she was noticed by the United Nations. She has presented to the UN on multiple occasions. Her knowledge and experience has been particularly valuable there as her studies have been global rather than confined to the US.
One of Dr. Trask's twin children describes her as the best mom, the best maker of waffles, and a super amazing person who tries very hard at everything they do. Her dedication to life is not only apparent among her family and dog, Mishmish, but in her academic work as well. Dr. Trask's life experience have inspired her career. Born to an Egyptian father and German mother, Dr. Trask lived in Egypt until she was 8. Then she immigrated to the United States, where she found success in school and has become the acclaimed academic we know today. Her multicultural background encourages her to look at issues about gender in a broader, more intersectional scope. She challenges ideology and framework that centers Western culture and statistics in the center of global women's equality, ensuring that other perspectives are heard and acknowledged. The goal of Dr. Trask's research is to better lives. She says, life is not just supposed to be one terrible big chore. I want to ease people's situations and I want to raise awareness. She continues her work to advance cultural understanding and gender equality worldwide. We are now excited to hear from Dr. Trask on her presentation entitled Global Gender Equality, Why Has This Goal Not Been Realized? Please join me in welcoming her to our colloquium.
Thank you so much. What a lovely welcome. And you got your information from multiple sources. So I'm very impressed. I don't think I've ever been introduced through my dog Mishmish and my daughter Julia. So thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen with you. I would very much like to thank Aaron Holmes for inviting me and Valerie Hegstrom for the wonderful organization and warm welcome. And also to Kate and Liz, and I know there were a couple others yesterday on the call as well. I'm super impressed by how organized all of you are, so thank you. Yes, your introduction was correct. I think it is, and the young women asked me yesterday what has been an important influence on me. And I think growing up, obviously in a multicultural family has heightened my sensitivity to global issues, but also I have at this point traveled all around the world and I've done research in different parts of the world, and all of that has shaped my thinking, and that really has come together with my work with the United Nations over the last 10 years. So I'm going to give you a broad strokes approach about why global gender equality has not been realized. I warn you, my presentation's a little bit depressing, and I was trying to think of a way to make it more cheerful, and I hope I end on a happier note than I'm going to begin with. So on that note, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but there are 17 of them. And what makes them unique is that the whole world has basically subscribed to trying to realize these goals by the year of 2030. And goal number 5 is gender equality. Provide women and girls with equal access to education, healthcare, decent work, and representation in political and economic decision-making progress. So I'm going to start with a little quiz, just for you to get you thinking. How many women lead the 195 countries of the world? Any guesses? 14. What percentage of Fortune 500 companies are run by women? 4.8%. In fact, the number has gone down in the last couple of years. How much less do women earn globally than men? Now you have to remember this is an aggregate, and I'm sure you're aware there's problems with aggregate figures, but still, just to give you a feeling, 23%. How many young women are married off before the age of 18? 750 million young women. That's 23 girls every single minute. So in Ethiopia, for example, 40% of girls were married in 2017 before they were 18, and 14% had become wives before the age of 15. One thing that I'm going to highlight in this talk, and that I would love to have a larger discussion about, is that there are enormous differences in the lives of girls and women, depending if they live in high-income countries and low-income countries. And also there's a lot of variation within countries, both in the high-income countries and in the low-income countries. So again, depending where you are, it's really going to affect what your chances are of being married off when you're very young and having babies when you're very young. And the main problem with that, besides health-related issues, is that if a girl marries very young at 14, 15, 16, it's going to stop her educational and occupational opportunities. And like I said, we can talk more about that. In many parts of the world, now this is something we take for granted in the United States, that having a baby is a joyous, blessed event. But in many parts of the world, having a baby is still the most dangerous thing that a woman can do. And in my little map that I have up there, it's from the World Health Organization. The darker the color, the more dangerous it is for a woman to have a baby. By the way, it is also dangerous in our country if you are a low-income woman. So we're not quite, even though our country is a nice pale pink, if we were going to zoom in, it's actually, the picture is not as cheerful as it looks on this map. Also, there are specific female concerns. So for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, there are 25.5 million people living with HIV. Out of that, 16 million are women. And most of those infections occur among adolescent girls. The girls are married off very young. The men get HIV because they are not faithful to their wives, and then they bring it home. And the girl is very young, and she has no way of dealing with that whole situation. Also, still, we have 125 million girls and women who have undergone female genital mutilation, despite there's a section in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which commits governments to take effective measures to abolish this practice. And again, this is just a map that shows you where we still find female genital mutilation. And you see it is sort of in Central Africa, including Egypt, which is at 91%, it's Sudan 88%, Mali 89%. And like I said, we can talk about all this further on. Hunger and malnutrition affect girls and young women in particular. If a woman does not get the right nutrition when she is pregnant, it affects the babies that she carries. And this is an enormous problem worldwide. Again, something that we don't focus on very much at all. But just to give you a little bit of a feeling, 18 million babies every year are born with brain damage due to iodine deficiency. So these are women that don't get enough iodine in their nutrition. Also, many women are anemic, and because of the anemia, they die in childbirth. So again, these are sort of hidden. We sometimes talk about poverty and we talk about not having enough food, but we don't talk about the actual sex-related consequences of that. So again, this is a hunger map, and it just gives you a little bit of a feeling of what areas in the world have very high degrees of hunger. Also, we have the issue of gender-based violence. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 3 women globally has experienced either physical or sexual violence. Those numbers may actually be higher because there's a lot of problems with how they gather the data and who reports and who doesn't. And psychological violence is not counted in as part of those statistics. According to the UN, also 49 countries don't have any kind of laws or policies in place protecting women from domestic violence. Also, these are, again, the statistics around domestic violence are very iffy because there are a lot of cultural and physical constraints to women reporting, but the World Health Organization estimates that less than 10% of women actually report violence. And particularly you see violence in areas of conflict. So areas, in refugee camps, places like that. So places that are not controlled properly and where the families try to protect their girls, but a lot of times these families they don't have any recourse. There's nothing that they can do. So. And I just also for the record want to say that boys can be at risk as well. Again, there are a lot of problems with how these statistics are gathered. And so we just sort of get bird-eye glimpses into what is going on in different parts of the world, but we don't have accurate statistics at all. So this is sort of based on, some statistical work and a lot of times just reporting from people, NGOs, people who are working in these areas, especially, like I said, in conflict areas. So how does this affect women? Well, I started off my talk by saying there's a big difference between high and low income countries. So in high income countries, life expectancy on average is around 82 years. And if you are middle class, upper middle class or wealthier, these days your life expectancy as a woman is actually much higher. It's much closer to 90. But in low-income countries, that is not the case. So you see there's a difference of almost 19 years in terms of life expectancy between high-income and low-income countries. So this raises the question, what is going on? This is not you are a class on global women's issues. So you know that the goal of gender equality has been around for a long time. And before we had the SDGs, we already had the Millennium Goals. And we had a goal of gender equality and empowerment. So what's happening? Everybody says this is very important. Everybody acknowledges that this is very important. But then you see the statistics and you see that there's a little bit of progress that has been made, but not a lot, even in the high income countries. That's why I started out with my little quiz. What's also very interesting is look at my slide here. Look at this first statistic. 95% of governments have committed to gender equality, and they've instituted policies, programs, and laws to try to help women. So what is going on? Only about 25% say that they've had any success at all. So these are staggering figures if you start to think about it. The most simplistic answer, and like I said, we can discuss this more, is that gender inequality, the unequal relationship between women and men, is entrenched in cultural ideals and social relationships. What that means is that our societies are structured in such a way that this inequality is built in. It's built into every facet of life. And that makes it very, very difficult just to come in from above and institute some laws and then feel that this is, it's going to help. So I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of what is being done in terms of gender equality. Well, countries have instituted, for example, access to sexual and reproductive health services. And the blue countries are the ones that have put this in place. The green are the countries that have actually put money behind these laws and policies and programs. And the orange column is countries that are reporting success. So we've got the laws, we've got the money, and then what happens? Yeah. So you can sort of get a little bit of a feeling. So the column number 2 is an interesting one, keeping more girls and adolescents in secondary school. Look at the low percentage over here, only 26%. I'm trying to see what's in health and nutrition, 25% success rate, even though I was just saying it's so super important for young women to have adequate nutrition, because that influences the next generation, not just themselves. Forced marriage, ending child marriage, only 18.8% success. So what are the obstacles? So what's going on here? Well, a variety of things are at work. One is low women's status, limited participation of women in civic activities. So girls and women in a lot of places just don't have the voice. They're not included in the decision-making about the laws and policies and programs that would actually help them. So it's the men making the decisions about what is going to happen to the girls. Local customs and social practices. I showed you the statistic on female genital mutilation. You know, it's very, very difficult to go into a society when you come, let's say, from America and say, well, I know better what is good for your family. You know, this is not an easy topic at all. For a while I was in graduate school, I became really interested in population control and sort of all of that, you know, how to deal with all of that. And the more I got into it, the more I realized this is not an easy topic to tackle at all, because you can't just go into a society, let's say a village in a non-Western country, where a woman's value, quote unquote value, is based on how many sons she has. And then I come in from America or from Germany and say, you must use birth control and limit yourself to having 1 or 2 children. That just doesn't work, you know, because the cultural conceptualization is very different. Her status in her family and her community is based on how many children she has and that she has sons. And so if I come in with my ideas and just say, you know, this is better for you, it means nothing at all. So cultural context and how people think about their lives and what they value is extremely important. And it is very, very difficult and also very culturally sensitive to think, you know, the way we do it is better, when that may not be the case. So these are very complex topics. Also, there is a low degree of interest a lot of times from politicians and decision makers to get involved in gender equality issues, especially when we're talking about low income countries. There are a lot of problems in those countries. Yeah, and so politicians are interested in getting the economy more going, you know, integrating their economies more into the global market, all of this sort of thing. Not everybody prioritizes gender equality as the main topic to be focused on. So what happens in a lot of places in the world? Well, in a lot of places, physically, a girl's world becomes small once she enters puberty. And for a boy, the actual physical space increases. So picture you are a young woman living in a village in rural India or rural Egypt or rural Nigeria. Well, once a young woman hits puberty, it's very difficult for her to go to school for modesty reasons. The secondary school may be far away. She would have to travel to that school. The family doesn't want her moving around alone. And a lot of times, even if the mother is working outside of the home, she needs the girl to take care of the siblings and take care of the domestic chores. So girls and boys are treated very differently, especially once they hit puberty. And once a young woman is constrained like that, it shrinks her opportunities because she's not going to school, she's not learning new skills, she is in danger of getting married off very young, and then that sort of cuts off her future, basically. So particularly in the education realm, this is where young women around the world are often very disadvantaged. I already talked about early marriage and early motherhood. A lot of times, if a family has to choose who's going to get to continue their schooling, they will still favor boys to continue their schooling. You may ask why. Well, it has to do with the idea that they will take care of the family once the parents are elderly. There's a socialization of girls into strict gender roles, and there is a very strict gender division of household labor. Also, a lot of times going to school for girls is dangerous because the schools themselves are dangerous. And there is a high degree of gender-based violence, especially in rural schools. So this gives you a little bit the percentage of adolescent girls not in lower secondary school, so high school, first couple of years of high school. You see in North America, Western Europe, pretty much everybody is going to school. But when you get to sub-Saharan Africa and South and West Asia, the statistics look really different. For sub-Saharan Africa, almost 36% of girls are not getting to go to high school. And like I said, that plays an enormous role in the whole trajectory of young women's lives. So again, just a little bit of a picture about what's going on. So in the poorest countries, I like this little visual, you see only half a person gets to go to secondary school. And in the richest countries, it is quite different. The worst areas in the world are the areas we don't talk about, which are the conflict-affected areas, places like Syria or refugee camps. And I've met some people, I've done some work in Greece in the last couple of years, and I've met people who live in refugee camps, and the stories they tell are just horrific. And we don't hear those stories. We don't see it on the news. These are kind of forgotten areas of the world at this point. So how does this affect individuals? Well, I'm sure you probably know this statistic already, that globally, about 2/3 of all illiterate individuals, 2/3 of those are women. And again, you can sort of see, these are the men, higher literacy rates, and you see for every part of the world, women have lower literacy rates. Gender still matters at home. So when looked at from a global perspective, women spend at least twice as much time as men on unpaid domestic work and on care work. And across the world, about 20% of working age women perform unpaid care work on a full-time basis. That's in comparison to around 1.5% of men. And I want to make a comment about that. So in the West and in the United States today, young men are socialized to, share equally in the responsibilities in the home. And the studies indicate that young men are doing this. When young men pair up and marry or end up in a long-term relationship, they help in the home, and they help with the children. They go to the prenatal classes. That's all part of our culture now. Where the divide happens is in other types of care for a terminally ill individual in the family, or especially having to do with elder care. Even in the United States, those are domains that are still dominated by women. So how has COVID hit with all of this? I teach a very large class, and every once in a while, my students say to me, why do you talk about gender issues? At least here in the United States, gender issues, they've been pretty much solved, yeah? And then COVID hit. And all of a sudden, or people would roll their eyes even when I say I study gender issues. It's like, who cares? COVID hit, and all of a sudden, gender has been a dominant part of this whole pandemic because there's been the realization. I talked about culturally entrenched ideals, and there's been a realization that even here in the United States, where we have really an ideology, at least, of equality and egalitarianism, with the onset of the pandemic, we have seen that it's been particularly women around the world, but also in the United States, that have been hardest hit by the pandemic, and in different ways. So right when the pandemic hit, there were actually more women in the US labor force than men. This is actually a statistic that really bothers me. I saw several New York Times articles that were like, yay, more women are in the labor force than men. What the statistics didn't tell is the real story, that yes, there were more women in the paid labor force, but women did not have the same kind of jobs that men had. So a lot of women were in vulnerable employment, and they were working in lower paying jobs, and they were working in hospitality. So here, just a couple, I don't want to overwhelm you with too many statistics, but just a little bit. 46% of all working women in the United States were working at low wage jobs. They were making $10.93 per hour. So I'm not sure that celebrating more women in the paid labor force was we're not quite there yet in terms of, celebrations. And particularly you see that communities of color were affected by this. So you see that Black women, Latina women, they were earning lower wages than white women. What happened with the pandemic? Well, particularly women with young children were really affected through COVID-19. About 2.2 million jobs were lost just between February and August 2020. That is a 12% drop. So and you see the difference here in terms of fathers, they had a 4% drop. So you see a real difference in the United States with all of our ideals about equality. See a huge, it was like an immediate break, and it was completely by gender also. The group that was hit the hardest were single mothers. So women who had young children who were alone. So you see, single women of young children lost 16% of jobs. For men, it was 6%. So COVID-19 had a lot of other impacts also, because I was saying women are in primarily, or at least half in service sector jobs. Well, that was also the sector that was hit the hardest by COVID-19. So the women lost their jobs, and then they ended up performing more domestic chores at home. So it was kind of a double whammy, a very sort of gender double whammy. They are in jobs that are dominated by women. They lose the jobs, they end up at home, and they end up doing more chores at home. And like I said, this particularly hit low-income households. Just an aside, I just the other day watched a really interesting documentary. It's by DW, and it traced the lives of 3 different families through the pandemic in New York. A wealthy family where they have a house in the Hamptons, the daughters are influencers, and they've been riding out the pandemic, making YouTube videos and, reading books on their Kindles by the beach. And then it showed 2 other families, low-income families, and how they've been hit by the pandemic in terms of losing their jobs, not having savings, being worried that they live in cramped conditions where you're much more likely to be infected, all of that. So we've had very different experiences just in our own society with respect to COVID-19. So this has been what I'm talking about for the United States, has also been a global phenomenon. So particularly the retail, hospitality, food service, manufacturing, and garment industries have been hit in terms of job losses. And all of those sectors are sectors that are dominated by women working in those sectors. I have another book called Women, Work and Globalization, where I wrote about this, where, why this demand through globalization for women, in these particular arenas around the world in terms of jobs. So here, this is a nice little map that shows you the bright red are where women are working in health and social work. So we have not just a gender division of labor at home, we have a gender division of labor in terms of work outside of the home and the realms of paid work that women enter. So another, I happened to run across this very recent study, gives you a little bit of a feeling in terms of hours spent by men and women on childcare and homeschooling during the lockdown. So blue is men and red is women. And you see United States, UK, Germany, the same patterns. And again, interesting graph, because what you see is these are all countries that have very much egalitarian frameworks in place now. And yet, when it comes, that's why I keep saying these are very fragile frameworks, because the pandemic hit very quickly, and look how quickly we fell into a complete division of labor by gender. So my talk is not going to end just on all these depressing statistics. There are solutions to all of this. Yeah, I see my purpose in raising awareness. Yeah, but I don't think we are just doomed to, not make any progress in our society. I am the young women asked me yesterday what I believe in. I am a big believer in human capability, whoever you are, whatever gender you identify with, whatever you feel is your thing. Each of us has capabilities, but we need the right context in which to flourish and in which to realize who we are. And I really believe it's different for each of us. And the big gift in life, in my opinion, is finding something that you feel you can actually make a difference. And it's going to be different for each of us. And I think that that's the beauty of our lives. So there is an organization called Plan UK, and they go around and they do studies on young women all around the world, and they try to help young women realize their potential. And they did they collected, what do young women around the world want? What do they wish for? What's their dream? And the girls wrote in, I want to become a policewoman. I want to join the army. I want to be an artist. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a writer, So this is what I'm trying to say is we all have the same wishes. It's not so different. Yeah. So, and also from this organization, what do people want? What do these young women dream of? Well, the absolute key to changing your life is a good education. And young people around the world recognize that. And that is true in high income and in low income countries. And then everything else comes behind that, having a government that supports you, healthcare, food, protection, better job opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. But education is key. So other things that can be done, well, I think whenever there are discriminatory laws and practices, changing those. I don't know if you realize it, you're all very young. But when I was little still, if you sent in a job application, you had to put if you were male or female, if you were married or not married, how old you were, and the place of your potential employment could put you in an out pile, And my mother told me that when she was young, that when you married, you stopped working. You didn't go, and your employer had the right also to fire you once you got married. So in those kind of ways, we've made a lot of progress in our society by eliminating those types of, discrimination. Also, we need better universal protection systems. What that means is that the governments around the world still have a role to play in terms of protecting their citizens by providing services. Services like healthcare, basic nutrition, basic shelter, that sort of thing. In different places, they are experimenting with different types of universal protection. For example, in Finland, they are giving poor families a basic income. They're not saying you have to buy food or you have to live here. They just give them, I don't remember what the sum is, you know, let's just pretend $1,000 a month, and then they have to figure out how they're going to survive. But it gives them a basic social net so that they don't end up completely destitute. These kind of social protection systems are very controversial in the United States. Yeah, we have a lot of debates back and forth. We have what's called a means tested system. So you have to qualify for certain types of programs. And like I said, in other parts of the world, you just, you know, everybody sort of get this sort of like a baseline from which everybody moves. So another thing that I think we need to focus on better is caregiving and unpaid work. Again, there are countries around the world where if you stay home and you take care of your babies or your elderly mother or an ill family member, the government gives you money, and it even gives you retirement benefits because it's considered a job. So we take it for granted that we just sort of do these things. But think about it, the minute you hire someone to babysit your children or to take care of your dog, you know, it all costs money. And so the idea is these are jobs, and we need to recognize them as jobs. And when people do them, they should be recognized for doing them. Also, like I said, there's an increase around the world in terms of cash transfer. That's where the government gives you money, and also targeted scholarships. So some countries around the world, for example, they have special scholarships for young women to encourage in societies where the culture encourages families to send boys to school. The government gives families money to also send the girls to school, you know, so that to sort of provide an incentive for the family to do this. Okay, I'm just quickly going, I've talked through a lot of these things, but stopping child marriage is a very, very important initiative. We've actually here in the United States now passed laws against that, but that is not true in a lot of different parts of the world, promoting gender parity in education, and also providing access for health and sexual and reproductive services to young people. This is absolutely key, educating people about these issues. Again, just to give you a little bit of a feeling for what's happening around the world, there are many countries that are trying to address these issues in different ways. So either through education, for example, through having curricula that are very sort of, that educate both boys and girls, having adolescent centers for both boys and girls where they can receive education and healthcare and food, you know, that sort of thing. I want to conclude and just say that I know we've sort of crammed a lot into a short amount of time, but I was trying to be mindful of your time here, is that we have very different contexts within the same society. And that is true in the United States, but it's also true around the world, including in low-income countries. So even in very low-income countries, you're going to have an elite where, you know, the lives of those families are going to be very, very different than the lives of families that are poor and they live either in these very large urban centers or they live in far away villages. So I just want us to be very careful and not to stereotype and say, you know, in the US it's like this, in Germany it's like this, and, you know, in Thailand it's like that. There's a lot of within society variation, and there is a lot of variation also between countries. So I look forward to our discussion.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Trask. We really appreciate that. So as Dr. Trask's research focuses on the relationship between family change, growing family complexity, and globalization in Western and non-Western contexts, she attempts to use her knowledge of cultural anthropology to understand human relationships and societies and then work towards a more equitable future. Her research has been presented at multiple TEDx conferences as well as in front of the UN as she seeks to educate others on how economic transformations are impacting family change and gender roles, how concepts of race, ethnicity, and gender are changing through globalizing influences, and what kind of policies can assist and strengthen low-income families. The work she presented to us today was a general overview of the state of gender equality worldwide, but there are many nuanced aspects that lie within each culture, each individual culture and family. Ultimately, her goal with her research is to help lift barriers that limit someone's potential. Sexism, racism, homophobia, poverty, and discrimination based on a number of identities limit people's, especially young women's, ability to contribute. While her research gives insights into the many problems of this world, it's her ability to educate us that allows her to inspire students to become passionate about the materials they are studying, to recognize that we are all part of a global community, and to become independent, reflective, lifelong learners.
Dr. Trask reminds us that progress is not inevitable. We must constantly be combating inequality to not allow ourselves to move backwards. The bottom line of her work is attempting to create a world where each of us can live better lives. Her work helps to remind us that gender equality is a basic human right, and regardless of your identity, you must have the opportunity to fulfill your own potential. In order to move forward, we must hold ourselves accountable and remain vigilant in order to keep moving forward. Her work allows us to question ourselves in the ways we can encourage progress in our own life. We are excited to continue the Q&A with her.
Okay, so we just have time for a couple of questions. So first, I've read a couple books like The Moment of Lift by Melinda Gates or Half the Sky, and they talk a lot about how when you empower women and lift up women, then it empowers the whole community that they're a part of. So I was wondering if you've seen that to be true in your research.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I mean, to me, that's sort of a logical thing. If you step back and you just think that, like I said previously, every individual has certain capabilities, you're missing, if you, let's say about half of human populations are female, half are male, right? If you don't empower half of it, you're going to miss out on all those talents. So,
yeah.
I'm an anthropologist also, so you have to remember, I always look through that lens. And, anthropologists have for the last, 150 years been busy with this issue. They're the earliest anthropologists, the ones that were writing in the mid to late 19th century. They were really interested in the topic that societies used to be potentially matriarchal, and then they became patriarchal, and what happened and why. And there's a lot of theories out there, but none of this has been proven. So yes, short answer, yes.
Hannah Robinson asks, you spoke about how at puberty, a girl's world shrinks while a boy's horizon expands. What is the solution to this? How can this gap be closed when the social construct involves keeping women and girls at home while the boys and men go to school?
That is a great question. So there's multiple things that can be done. And the first is, a lot of times families are nervous in those places where this happens. For example, in the Middle East, in South Asia, family is nervous about sending the girl, a young woman, to a school because she has to travel to the school. There are not nearby schools. So there's not easy access to education. I think remote learning is the first, that would be the first thing that can happen. We need more schools and all that. But if, let's say we're talking about a place where they just don't have the resources. Now we have the capabilities to become educated in far away places. That is really a change I've seen in my lifetime. So I think that's one thing. The second is educating boys and men about the value that having educated women in your family, what that brings. There are some really interesting studies and examples that come out of Bangladesh, for example. Bangladesh is a country, very poor country, and was always very divided by gender, with the girls staying at home and having to work in the fields and all of that. There have been some major international initiatives to educate girls, to provide schooling, to bring schooling to rural areas, giving the families money to allow the girls to go to school. And you know what has happened in Bangladesh? The girls are outperforming the boys. They're doing better in all indicators, elementary school, secondary school, they're getting more jobs. And you know what has happened in those families? The families now want the girls to be educated because they see that there's all this potential that's there. So getting the information out and addressing, I actually don't just work on gender issues. I work on family issues because I think these are family problems. A lot of times we talk about gender, we talk about girls and women in isolation, and I see that as very, very problematic. This needs to be a family dialogue. The more that men are involved in this conversation, the better it is for everybody involved. I say this even from personal experience. You began the talk and somebody introduced me. I was very, very lucky. I had an Egyptian father. Egypt's a culture that is pretty, even today, there's a division of labor and all that. But I had a father who believed in girls' education, and he was the one who pushed me and who said, the more educated you are, the happier you will be. You will be able to make a difference in your life. You'll be able to accomplish something. He actually believed that even more than my mother did, and had a huge impact on me and my brother. My brother would never, I cannot imagine that he would think, that there's this difference that should be enforced. So I've seen in my own life the importance of a family-centered approach to these issues.
And then I think we have time for one more question. Professor Hedstrom, is that okay? Okay. We have, how can we help to change damaging cultural norms while still respecting the culture as a whole?
Yeah, and that's the $1 million question. This is the complicated thing. Like I said, you cannot just come from the outside and tell people what to do. We would not want that. Yeah. Do we want people from Canada coming to the United States and telling us this is how you should live? Whatever, I'm just using that as an example. We would not like that. Think about it. Everybody in the United States would be extremely offended, and we would have a lot of initiatives against the Canadians for telling us what to do and how to live. It's like that when we go to other countries. So, speaking as the anthropologist, you have to learn to, I believe in this concept of cultural humility. You have to be open to other ways of thinking. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the work of Pierre Bourdieu, and he was a French social philosopher, and he wrote about something called habitus. Habitus are the beliefs that are around us that we take for granted, that we think they're immutable. I'll give you an example. In the United States, we believe children must be in school. Yeah, we don't like it when people don't send their children to school. We think something's wrong with them. If you have a 6, 7, 8-year-old and you say, I don't want my kid to go to school, that's not acceptable in the United States. That's habitus. But there are cultures around the world where going to school as a young child actually doesn't make sense for whatever reason. I don't want to get into the complications of it. I'm just trying to give some examples of things that we think are absolutely, they're given. So we need to learn what's that which we think is immutable. And we do that best, I think, is by going to other places and being open to understanding how other people think and live. I think that that's the beginning of it. We have it here in the United States. We're a very, very heterogeneous society. And we sort of know that it's an overarching principle that we have, but when push comes to shove, we're not always comfortable with that, that we have very different lifestyles even amongst us. So again, the way different groups of people live, it's based on survival. We've evolved in different places to adjust ourselves to those places. So I'm a cultural relativist. I don't want to say this is better than that. It's, it works for different groups in different ways. But the bottom line is there are some things that I personally think are human rights. They are rights for everybody. The right to shelter, the right to an education, the right to determine the course of your own life. You know, I raised the issue, for example, of child marriage. You know, when usually 14-year-olds don't make the decision to marry. This is a decision that's made by the parents. I'm a big believer in everybody having the right to choose and to learn also about the choices that are out there. So again, I go to my basic principle, education is key. And then, you know, you do with your education what you then think is appropriate.
Thank you so much, Professor Trask.
Let's just give Professor Trask a round of applause, a virtual round of applause. We're so grateful she's here.